Folks, thank you for your testimony and your work. As I mentioned to the earlier panel, I'm concerned about the fact that because 40% of the money we've spent in the last 7 years is borrowed, we borrowed some $50 billion to support our USAID and our MCC work over the last just 7 years alone. And so, Congressman, I applaud what you guys did. It's funny how fast 10 years goes by. In that period of time, the earlier testimony was that of the programs that we have done, some 58 are averaging about 16% return versus the 10% threshold. In that period of time, there are some 21 projects that were done without having met the threshold for internal rate of return, or weren't the benefit cost analysis wasn't even calculated. My concern, and then in addition, there were two specific projects where it looks like there was undue influence for strategic reasons for approval for a project without MCC, or without MCC doing a benefit cost analysis. So my question goes back to the original thinking. Given that over that period of time, we spend of $1 billion a year, we spend $100 million in our own overhead in managing that, which means the last 10 years we spent $1 billion in overhead that didn't go to any direct help. What was the original thinking, and how was that debate won with regard to why MCC versus charging a part of USAID to focus on eliminating poverty through economic growth?
Well, I'll take a stab at it, and I'm sure Ms. Natsios will also have an answer. I think first of all, I want to say that I do disagree a little bit with the CEO, Ms. Dana, in saying that there's never been any pressure on MCC. That's not true. There has been pressure from the get-go during the Bush administration as well as ongoing. And I think it's a natural thing that the State Department and others are going to say, but, you know, we have some strategic interests.
But don't we have to protect?
That's what we need to do, is what the role of Congress is to make sure that it's protected from doing that. And I think the outside, independent, private sector board members have been the critical factor in making sure that that happens.
Can I ask you another question on that? I don't want to get you off that line of answer, but the fact that the board reports directly to the secretary.
He's chairman of the board.
He's
right.
chairman, so that means that
yeah.
there is no undersecretary or assistant secretary that has responsibility for MCC. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is that working out in your mind in terms of operational review and maintaining that independence?
I think it's worked as best that it can. I mean, I guess you could think of other places that it might report, but I think it's logical that the Secretary of State be the chairman of it, and I think the fact that it has a board that includes several agencies plus the 4 outside members, I think has been critical to maintaining the independence of the board. So I think by and large I would agree with Ms. Dana, Ms. Hyde, that it has been successful in resisting, for the most part, that pressure. Not always, but for the most part it has been successful in doing that. To go to the thrust of your original question, the idea of it at the time we created was that USAID had a different mission, and this was the idea here, was to work with countries that had a commitment to governance, to good governance, and that focused solely on that, so that they met objective criteria. And I can remember from the day we passed that legislation, a line of ambassadors outside my door lining up to say, how do we get in? How are we going to get into this? And I would say, it's not up to me. I'm not going to get you into it. It's going to be your meeting these criteria that's going to do it. So I think it has been successful in that sense.
Thank you. Mr. Natsu?
Thank you. I was deeply involved in the initial drafting. In the original conception of this, AID was supposed to run it. And there was White House intrigue. I don't want to go into it all. The president actually twice told his staff he did not want to have 2 foreign aid agencies, and he did not understand why they kept insisting. So I could go into it in some detail. There were personalities involved, and a lot of it was.
Well, the question
very
is, what should we do? What's the best use of the money?
Well, I argued with 2 other aid administrators, Peter McPherson, who was aid administrator under Reagan, and Brian Atwood under President Clinton. This is a bipartisan article we wrote for Foreign Affairs in which we argued we should do what Richard Nixon did when he became president. He re-centralized all of the aid programs in one place, AID. If you wanted to get other domestic agencies involved, like the U.S. Geological Survey has seismologists. I mean, AID doesn't have seismologists, so AID would send the money there, not OMB directly. These agencies had to report to AID and perform, or they would be shut off from money. That's not the case now. We have 24 different agencies of the federal government doing aid programs all over the world, and they don't report to anyone, frankly.
I understand.
And they don't report to you, I might add. These are domestic, they report domestic committees, and the oversight committees domestically don't know anything about this. It's the foreign affairs committees that should have the oversight, not all these domestic committees in my view. So I have advocated with Brian Atwood and Peter McPherson in an article that came out in Foreign Affairs in October, November of 2008 to restructure the whole system very substantially to put these functions back in AID the way, and Nixon did this, might add, with Hubert Humphrey, interestingly enough. The old adversaries, they got together on these reforms in the late 1960s after Nixon had defeated Humphrey. But on this, they agreed. We needed a stronger program. Two, it's not quite true to say this is new. Because in the 80s, and I used to tell this to the people designing it, I said, we did, because I was there, in the 1980s, in the 1990s, we have the Development Fund for Africa, and it was performance-based. You had to perform to get the money. This concept is not new. We had it in place, and because of all the massive cuts in aid in the 1990s after the end of the Cold War, the whole program was shut down and the program collapsed. So there are roots in the past, and we do know it can have an effect, because we can show that from the record of the 1980s and early 1990s.